A vacation at Blue Horizon Resort, the coastal paradise of Hilton Head, was supposed to be a peaceful time for the Harrison family. Malcolm Mack Harrison, 65 years old, sat relaxing by the pool, sunlight reflecting through his sunglasses as he watched his two grandchildren splashing in the water. Esther, his wife, calmly read a book, while their son Ben laughed and snapped photos of the kids. Everything seemed perfect, until an officer appeared. Without warning, without reason, Mac was handcuffed right in front of his family. They barely had time to react before he was dragged away. Unbeknownst to anyone, the man they'd just arrested was an FBI agent, and the truth, once revealed, would spare no one. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the latest stories. Vincent Cole, a security guard at the resort, approached, his tall frame clad in a black uniform. "Sir," he said, his voice stiff, "I need to verify that you're a guest here." Mac looked up, slowly removing his sunglasses, locking eyes with Cole. "I am a guest," he replied, his voice deep and calm. "Room 508. Esther immediately set her book down, her eyes flashing with alertness. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone calm but sharp. Ben stopped taking photos, stepping closer, his brows tightly furrowed. Lila and Ethan stopped playing, swimming to the edge, their worried eyes fixed on their grandfather. Cole smiled, but it was a cold smile. "Just procedure, sir. I need to know the exact room number." "I just told you," Mac replied, still maintaining his composure. "Room 508. We arrived yesterday." Cole nodded, but didn't leave. He crossed his arms, his gaze scrutinizing the entire family. "I need to check with the front desk. Please bear with me. It's policy," he said, his tone dry, as if the Harrison family were a nuisance. Esther sat up straighter, her voice growing sharper. "Is there a problem?" She looked at Cole, then glanced at the White families, relaxing around the pool, none of whom were being bothered. Cole faltered briefly, but maintained his rigid demeanor. "No problem, ma'am. Just routine procedure." Ben couldn't hold back, stepping forward. "What procedure? My dad gave you the room number. Why don't you go check it now?" His voice was harsh, his hand gripping his phone tightly. Mac raised a hand to stop his son, his eyes still fixed on Cole. "Let them check, Ben," he said softly, but his voice carried a heavy restraint. He recognized that look in Cole's eyes, the suspicious stare he'd seen too many times in his life. Lila clung to the pool's edge, her 14-year-old eyes filled with worry. "Grandpa, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan stood beside her, clutching Lila's hand, his 10-year-old face confused. Mac smiled reassuringly, but his heart felt heavy. "It's okay, Lila, just a misunderstanding," he said, though he knew the bitter truth. Cole turned away, saying he'd contact the front desk, but his steps were slow, as if deliberately prolonging the tension. When he disappeared behind the palm trees, the atmosphere at the pool had shifted. Lila and Ethan's laughter was gone. Esther gripped Mac's hand, her eyes blazing. "They can't do this to us," she whispered, her voice quivering with anger. Ben shook his head, still clutching his phone. "I won't let this slide, Dad." Mac sighed, trying to maintain his calm. He didn't want his grandkids to see the disappointment simmering inside him. In that quiet moment, memories flooded back, transporting him to his days as an FBI agent. Mac had once been called Iron Mac, a legend in the field, with over 3 decades of busting drug rings and corruption cases. He'd faced the most dangerous criminals, but what hurt him more were the times he'd been doubted simply because of his skin color. Once, as a young agent, a colleague questioned him at a crime scene, despite his FBI uniform. "Who are you to be here?" Those words cut like a knife. Mac had learned to stay composed, but each time, the wound in his heart deepened. Esther, sitting beside him, was no stranger to such injustices. A former civil rights lawyer, she'd stood in courtrooms, fighting for the oppressed. She'd faced contemptuous stares and whispered insults, but never backed down. Esther had always been proud of Mac, the husband, who not only protected the country, but shielded their family with all his heart. But today, she felt a fire of anger ignite, not just for Mac, but for Lila and Ethan, the kids who shouldn't have to witness this. Ben, their son, stood a few steps away, his eyes still glued to where Cole had gone. As an investigative journalist, Ben had written about all kinds of injustices, from police overreach to racism in schools, but when it hit his own family, he felt more powerless than ever. Ben often clashed with Mac over how to handle injustice. He wanted swift, public action, while Mac was cautious, measured. "Dad, why do you let them do this?" Ben whispered, his voice thick with frustration. Mac just looked at his son, saying nothing, but his eyes spoke volumes. He understood, but he wanted to shield the family first. Lila, 14, sat at the pool's edge, her eyes still brimming with tears, smart and dreaming of becoming a lawyer, like her grandmother. She now felt scared and confused. "Grandpa, why don't they believe you?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan, 10, stood beside her, his face stubborn. "They're wrong. Grandpa didn't do anything," he said, his fists clenched. Mac smiled, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's right, I didn't do anything wrong. Don't worry, it'll be okay," he said, though he knew the reassurance was only temporary. Outside, Blue Horizon Resort still gleamed with its lush palm trees and sprawling beach. But for the Harrison family, the place now felt alien. Guests around the pool resumed their conversations, but a few eyes still snuck glances at Mac's family, as if they were the center of curiosity. Esther stood, folding her book shut, her voice firm. "We're not letting this go easily, Mac," she said, her gaze piercing straight into her husband. Mac had hoped this vacation would be a time for the family to find joy, but Cole's suspicion had shattered everything. He glanced at Esther, seeing her resolute eyes, and knew she was holding back fury. Ben, with his fiery nature, seemed ready to explode. Lila and Ethan, though young, sensed something was wrong. Mac sighed, telling himself he had to keep things under control, at least for the kids. But then, Vincent Cole reappeared, this time not alone. Beside him was Greg Larson, another security guard, younger, with a confidence bordering on arrogance. Both strode quickly toward the Harrison family, their faces devoid of any politeness. Cole stopped in front of Mac's chair, his voice harder than before. "Sir," he said, "we need you and your family to leave the pool area right now, until we've verified your information." Mac sat up straight, removing his sunglasses, his eyes locking onto Cole. "I've already told you," he replied, his voice still calm, but carrying an unshakable resolve. "We're in room 508. If you want to verify, call the front desk right here. There's no need to make us leave." Esther stood, her eyes blazing. "I don't understand why we have to leave," she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "We've answered all your questions. This is unreasonable harassment." She stared straight at Cole, then turned to Larson, as if daring them both. Cole avoided Esther's gaze, but kept his rigid stance. "We've had issues with non-guests sneaking into the pool area," he said, his tone cold. "This is policy to protect the resort's property." His explanation sounded like an excuse, and the Harrison family saw right through it. Ben lost his cool, stepping forward and pointing at Cole. "What policy? You're targeting us because we're different, aren't you?" His voice trembled with anger, his other hand still gripping his phone, ready to record at any moment. Lila and Ethan stood near their dad, their eyes fearful, yet full of indignation. "Grandpa didn't do anything wrong," Ethan shouted, his 10-year-old voice echoing in the quiet space. Larson, with a smirk, crossed his arms. "We're not targeting anyone," he said, his tone defiant. "Lots of people sneak in here who aren't guests. We're just doing our job." His words only fueled the fire. Esther took a step forward, her gaze unwavering. "Doing your job? You're insulting our family, without any valid reason," she said, her voice sharp like an indictment. "Do you apply this policies to everyone, or just families like ours? Cole faltered, but he tried to stay stern. Ma'am, this isn't personal, we're just ensuring the resort's security. But the hesitation in his voice betrayed his words. Mac placed a hand on Esther's shoulder, trying to calm her, though he too was suppressing his anger. Let them check, Esther, he said, quietly, but his eyes didn't leave Cole. If you need to verify, call the front desk now. We're not going anywhere. His voice was low but powerful, like a warning. Larson smirked, his smile mocking. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to do this the hard way, he said, his tone threatening. A few guests around the pool started to notice, some pulling out their phones to record, but no one spoke up. The air grew thick, as if a single spark could ignite everything. Lila hugged Ethan tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. Grandpa, they won't do anything to you, right? She asked, her voice shaking. Mac bent down, resting a hand on Lila's shoulder, forcing a reassuring smile. It's okay, Lila, I'll handle this, he said. But inside, disappointment surged. He thought he could shield his family from this, but now it was unfolding right before the kids' eyes. Esther looked at Mac, her eyes full of resolve. We're not letting them keep doing this, she whispered. Ben nodded, his phone already recording. I'll capture everything, he said, his voice steady. No one in the family backed down. They stood up, not just for themselves, but for fairness. Mac stayed in his chair, his sharp eyes tracking Vincent Cole and Greg Larson, the two security guards who just threatened to kick them out of the pool area. Esther stood beside him, clutching her book, as if she might snap it in half. Ben moved silently, recording every gesture, every word. Lila and Ethan huddled by the pool's edge, their young eyes burning with anger. The space felt dense, nothing left but tense silence, and a family ready to face injustice. Mac had faced all kinds of unfairness during his 3 decades as an FBI agent, but seeing his family, especially Lila and Ethan, insulted during a vacation, was a fresh wound. Esther glanced at him, her eyes saying, "We can't let them keep going." Ben whispered to his mom, "I've got it all on video. They've got no real reason." But before Mac could reply, 2 new figures appeared, making things worse. Officer Kyle Brennan, a young cop with an aggressive demeanor, and Officer Carl Simmons, older and more cautious, approached from the pool entrance. Their blue uniforms stood out under the sunlight, but Brennan's eyes were cold, full of bias. Cole and Larson stood behind, exchanging a few words with the cops before pointing at the Harrison family. Brennan stepped closer, his voice ringing out, dry and authoritative. "Sir, we've received a report of a disturbance here. I need you to show me some ID." Mac looked up, his eyes locking onto Brennan. He slowly pulled his wallet from his pocket, taking out his retired FBI ID and driver's license, handing them to Brennan with remarkable calm. "I'm Malcolm Harrison," he said, his voice deep and steady, "former FBI agent. We're guests here, room 508. You can check with the front desk if you need to." Brennan took the ID, glanced at it, then smirked. "Former FBI agent," he repeated, his tone mocking. "I don't care who you used to be. We need to confirm you're a legitimate guest." He tossed the ID onto the chair beside Mac, as if it meant nothing. Esther stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice sharp like an accusation. "My husband gave you his ID. We're in room 508. What more do you want?" She stood in front of Mac, as if shielding him from the escalating insult. Brennan ignored Esther, turning to Mac. "Stand up," he ordered, his voice cold. "If you don't cooperate, we'll have to do this another way." Simmons, behind him, frowned, but didn't intervene, his eyes scanning the growing crowd of guests. Ben switched his phone to live stream, his voice trembling with rage. "Look at this, everyone," he said, aiming the camera at Brennan. "They're harassing my family for no reason." The video started pulling in dozens of online viewers, but Brennan didn't care. He moved forward, grabbed Mac's arm, and yanked him to his feet. "Don't touch me," Mac said, his voice still calm but carrying undeniable strength. I've given you my ID. You have no right to do this. But Brennan didn't listen. He pulled handcuffs from his belt, snapped them tightly around Mac's wrists, cuffing him in front of his family and the crowd. Lila screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Grandpa, don't do that." She bolted from the pool, running toward Mac, but Esther held her back, her eyes a mix of anger and pain. Ethan, his face flushed with fury, shouted, "Let my grandpa go. He didn't do anything wrong." The 10-year-old stomped his foot, tears rolling down his cheeks. Esther pulled Lila from her grip, stepping up to face Brennan. "You can't do this," she yelled, her voice echoing across the pool area. "My husband's an FBI agent who served this country for over 30 years. On what grounds are you cuffing him?" She tried to push Brennan away, but Simmons stepped in, holding her back. "Ma'am, calm down," Simmons said, his tone stiff. "If you don't step back, I'll have to arrest you." Ben swung the camera toward Esther and Mac, his voice breaking with outrage. "You see this? This is how they treat a former FBI agent and his family." The crowd of guests around the pool began murmuring, many pulling out phones to record, but no one dared step in. Mac, though handcuffed, stood tall, his eyes unflinching. "You're making a mistake," he said to Brennan, his voice low but commanding. "Check my ID. I'm not the person you're looking for." But Brennan just smirked, pulling Mac toward the pool exit. In that moment, old memories flooded Mac's mind. He recalled a time, years ago, when local police stopped him during a mission, just because of his skin color. "Who are you to be here?" Those words rang in his head again, a wound that never healed. But this time, the pain was greater, because Lila and Ethan were watching it all. Esther shouted one last time, her voice breaking, "Let my husband go right now." But Brennan didn't stop. Simmons turned to Cole and Larson, signaling them to keep the crowd quiet. Lila's sobs and Ethan's yells mixed with the guests' murmurs, forming a chorus of injustice. Esther broke free from Simmons, her eyes burning like an unquenchable flame. "You have no right to do this," she shouted, her voice ringing across the pool area. "My husband's an FBI agent who gave over 30 years to this country. On what basis are you cuffing him? I demand you release him immediately, or I'll sue you and your entire police department." She pointed straight at Brennan, her voice cutting like an indictment, earning nods from a few nearby guests. Brennan smirked, sneering. "Go ahead and sue," he said, his tone defiant. "We got a report of a troublemaker, and he's not cooperating. I'm just doing my job." He tightened his grip on Mac, pulling harder, as if to prove his authority. Ben stepped forward, the live stream still rolling, now with over 100 viewers online. "This isn't your job. This is discrimination," he yelled, aiming the camera at Brennan. "You see this, everyone? My dad's a former FBI agent, showed his ID, but they're cuffing him, just because of our skin color." His voice cracked with rage, but he kept going. The crowd grew louder, a few boos rising from the back. Lila yanked free from Esther, rushing toward Mac, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Let my grandpa go," she screamed, her 14-year-old voice full of anguish. Ethan followed, grabbing Lila's hand, shouting, "Grandpa didn't do anything wrong. You're all awful." The children's cries pierced Mac's heart like a dagger, but he stood firm, his gaze steady. Mac turned to Brennan, his voice low but powerful. "You're making a big mistake," he said, each word forged in steel. "I gave you my ID. I'm Malcolm Harrison, former FBI agent. If you want to verify, call the front desk now. Keep this up, and you'll face the consequences." His words weren't a threat, but a cold fact, rooted in decades of facing injustice. Brennan laughed loudly, his tone mocking. "Old man, I don't care who you are, just stay put." He turned to Simmons, signaling to keep the crowd in check, but Simmons hesitated, his eyes flicking to Esther and the kids, then down to Mac's FBI ID still on the chair. "Kyle, check it again," he said quietly, his voice losing its certainty. But before Brennan could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Stop right now." A middle-aged woman, tough-looking in business attire, stepped out from the crowd. It was Diane Foster, Mac's former FBI colleague, coincidentally at the resort for a conference. She approached, her sharp eyes sweeping over Brennan and Simmons. "I'm Special Agent Diane Foster, FBI," she said, flashing her badge in front of the cops. "The man you're cuffing is Malcolm Harrison, one of the best agents I've ever worked with. Release him now, or I'll report this to your superiors." Brennan faltered briefly, but tried to stay tough. "We're just following procedure," he said, his voice weaker. Diane stepped closer, her tone icy. "What procedure involves cuffing a former FBI agent in front of his family? I worked with Mac for over 20 years, and I know he's no troublemaker. Let him go right now." The crowd erupted. Boos rang out from all sides. Phones raised higher, capturing every second. "Let him go," a woman in the crowd shouted, followed by a chorus of agreement. Ben's livestream now had hundreds of viewers, comments flooding the screen. Racism, justice for him. The pressure from the crowd, and Diane's arrival, forced Simmons into action. He put a hand on Brennan's shoulder, his voice urgent. "Kyle, let him go. We don't need more trouble." Brennan gritted his teeth, his eyes full of resentment, but he couldn't resist the pressure. He reluctantly pulled out the key, unlocking Mac's cuffs, his voice gruff. "Fine, you're free." Mac rubbed his wrists, standing tall, his eyes never leaving Brennan, but he said nothing more. Esther rushed forward, hugging Mac tightly, tears falling onto his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Lila and Ethan ran to him, clinging to their grandfather, sobbing. "Grandpa, I was so scared," Lila said, while Ethan gripped Mac's hand, his face flushed. Ben lowered his phone, his eyes still burning. "They'll pay for this," he said, his voice resolute. Diane approached, resting a hand on Mac's shoulder, her eyes full of empathy and resolve. "I never thought I'd see you like this, Mac," she said softly, but firmly. "But trust me, they won't get away with it." Mac nodded slightly, offering a faint smile, his eyes calm, yet smoldering with an inner fire. "Thanks, Diane. I'm ready now." The crowd around the pool kept buzzing, a few starting to clap as Mac was freed, a natural reaction to the injustice just exposed. Brennan and Simmons stepped back, hastily conferring with Cole and Larson, four faces showing clear unease and confusion. Mac turned to his family, his gaze sweeping over Esther, Ben, then resting on Diane. In that moment, his eyes weren't those of a man just humiliated. They were the eyes of someone who'd risen, ready to shine the light of justice on the darkness that had just descended. Mac bent down, pulling Lila and Ethan into his arms, his voice warm but steady. "It's okay, you two. I'm here with you," he said, wiping the tears from Lila's cheeks. Lila looked up, her 14-year-old eyes still red. "I thought they'd take you away forever," she whispered, her voice shaky. Ethan, his 10-year-old face flushed, gripped Mac's hand tightly. "I hate them, Grandpa. Why did they do that to you?" His voice choked, innocence mixed with outrage. Mac gave a faint smile, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Not everyone understands what justice is, Ethan," he said, his voice carrying a deep calm. "But we won't let them win. We'll stand up, together." His words were a promise, not just to the kids, but to Esther and Ben too. Esther let go of Mac, wiping her tears, her eyes hardening. "We can't let this pass like it's nothing," she said, her voice firm. "They humiliated you in front of the grandkids, in front of everyone. I won't forgive that." She turned to Ben, still clutching his phone. "Ben, that video is evidence. We'll use it to demand justice." Ben nodded, his eyes flashing with determination. "I've saved it all," he said, his voice solid. "Over 500 people watched the live stream, and I'll post it online. They'll pay. The police, the resort, all of them." He glanced at Mac, seeking his approval. Mac nodded slightly, his eyes full of pride. "Do it, Ben," he said. "But we need more than a video. We need action." Diane stepped forward, her eyes full of sympathy, yet resolve. "Mac, I'll call some people at the FBI," she said quietly. "This can't end here. I'll testify if you need me to. They can't treat you like this." Mac looked at Diane, offering a faint smile. "Thanks, Diane," he said. "I knew I could count on you." But before the family could leave the pool area, Edward Hayes, the resort manager, appeared, his face full of worry. He approached, hands clasped, his voice shaky. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, I'm sorry for this misunderstanding," he said, forcing an awkward smile. "We didn't want this to happen. I'm willing to compensate. Free rooms, meals, anything you want." Esther turned to Hayes, her eyes cold as ice. "Compensate?" she repeated, her tone dripping with contempt. "You think we want money? My husband was handcuffed in front of our grandkids, treated like a criminal, just because of our skin color. This isn't something you can buy off with free rooms." She pointed at Hayes, her voice ringing like an accusation. "We want justice, not your pity." Hayes stepped back, his face paling. I'll review our policies," he stammered. But Esther cut him off. "You should have done that long ago," she said, her tone icy. Mac placed a hand on Esther's shoulder, his eyes on Hayes. "Thanks for the apology," he said, his voice low but firm. "But we're not stopping here." The Harrison family left the pool area, their steps heavy but resolute. Lila held Ethan's hand, her eyes still red but less shaky. "Grandpa, what'll we do next?" she asked, her voice soft. Mac bent down, looking straight into Lila's eyes. "We'll fight, Lila," he said. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's been treated like this." As they entered the hotel lobby, Ben checked his phone, his eyes lighting up. "The video's spreading fast," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and anger. "Thousands of views already. Local news reached out to me." Esther nodded, her eyes glinting with hope. "Good," she said. "They need to know about this." Mac sat in a lobby chair, pulling Lila and Ethan close. He looked at the kids, then at Esther and Ben, his heart torn between anger and pride. He'd thought retirement would bring peace, but today, he realized injustice never rests. "We're a family," he said, his voice low but powerful, "and no one gets to hurt us without paying a price." Esther sat beside him, gripping his hand tightly, as if pouring her strength into him. "We'll bring this into the light, Mac," she said, her voice unwavering, like a vow. Ben sat across from them, still holding his phone, his eyes blazing with resolve. "I'll start writing the article right now," he said. "This is just the first step." Mac broke the silence, his voice low but weighty. "We can't let this slide," he said. "They didn't just humiliate us in front of each other. They did it in front of strangers. We have to speak up." He paused, his gaze softening as it landed on Lila and Ethan, two kids who didn't fully grasp what had happened, but felt the unfairness. "For you two," he said, "and for everyone who's been treated like this with no one to stand up for them." Esther nodded, her eyes blazing. "I've contacted Patricia Young," she said, her voice steady. "She's the best civil rights lawyer I worked with back in court. I gave her a rundown of the incident, and she's ready to meet us as soon as we get back." She turned to Ben. "Your video is key evidence. We'll use it to sue the police department and this resort." Ben held up his phone, his voice a mix of excitement and fury. "Over 3,000 views already," he said. "Local news is asking for details, and an activist group in Hilton Head wants to hold a press conference. I'll write the article tonight and send it to the Hilton Head Chronicle. They can't deny this." He looked at Mac, his eyes seeking approval. Mac nodded, his gaze proud. "Good, Ben," he said. "But we need more evidence. I'll call Diane." He pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing Diane Foster, his former FBI colleague, who'd stood up for him at the pool. When Diane answered, her voice came through, tough but warm. "Mac, you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, Diane," Mac replied, his tone deep. "But we need your help. Can you testify to my identity? And if possible, reach out to some FBI contacts to look into this. I don't want it to end with an apology." Diane chuckled softly over the line. "I was already planning to, Mac," she said. "I'll file a report with the higher-ups and testify whenever you need. They won't get off easy." Esther turned to Lila and Ethan, her eyes softening. "Want to help?" she asked, her voice gentle. Lila looked up, nodding firmly. "I want to tell what happened," she said, her voice small but resolute. "I want people to know what they did to Grandpa." Ethan grabbed his sister's hand, his eyes bright. Me too, Grandma. I'll tell them how wrong they were. Mac smiled, resting a hand on each child's shoulder. Good job, he said. Your voices will make them listen. Ben sat at the table, typing on his phone. I'll write the article from the whole family's perspective, he said. From Dad getting cuffed, to Mom standing up, to Lila and Ethan's fear. This isn't just our story, it's the story of thousands of others. He paused, looking at Mac. What do you think, Dad? Mac stayed quiet for a moment, his eyes pensive. He recalled his FBI days, investigating police abuses, thinking retirement would end those battles. But now, he knew he couldn't stop. I think we need to go bigger, he said. Not just sue, but make people think. Diane mentioned a press conference with activists. We should join, but I want this story to inspire, not just stir debate. Esther nodded, gripping his hand tighter. We'll make it happen, Mac, she said. Together. Ben looked at his family, his eyes alight with determination. I'll get the article ready now, he said. Tomorrow, the world will know. The press conference took place at a small park near the Hilton Head Island beach, just steps from Blue Horizon Resort. Mac stood amid his family, his eyes resolute yet warm. Esther held his hand, her face radiating determination. Ben, with the phone that had captured it all, now stood at the mic, his voice ringing out strong. My family was treated unfairly, just because of our skin color, he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of reporters and activists. My dad, a former FBI agent, was handcuffed in front of my kids. We're here to demand justice, not just for us, but for everyone who's endured this. Esther stepped forward, her voice sharp but inspiring. We've filed a lawsuit against the police department and the resort, she said. This isn't personal, it's systemic. We want change. The crowd applauded, voices of support rising from all sides. Mac approached the mic, his voice low but powerful. I've spent my life defending justice, he said. Today, I'm fighting not just for my family, but for everyone doubted without reason. Ben's video had spread across social media, racking up tens of thousands of views. Local and national news outlets covered it heavily, making the incident a focal point for discussions on racial equality. The Hilton Head police promised an internal investigation, but the Harrison family didn't stop. They were determined to see the lawsuit through, backed by Diane Foster and attorney Patricia Young. After the press conference, the family walked to the nearby beach, the red sunset stretching across the water. Max sat on the sand, Leela and Ethan on either side, holding his hands. Grandpa, did we win yet? Ethan asked, his voice full of hope. Max smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair. We haven't won yet, but we've started, he said. Leela looked up, her eyes shining. I want to be a lawyer like Grandma, to protect people, she said. Mac hugged Leela tightly, his heart swelling with pride. Esther and Ben stood nearby, watching the three on the sand. We'll keep going, right? Ben asked, his voice steady. Esther nodded, squeezing her son's hand. Yes, she said. Together. Mac looked at his family, his eyes glowing with hope. Justice wasn't easy, but with unity and courage, they wouldn't give up. The Harrison family stood, walking along the beach, leaving footprints in the sand, a mark of a fight just begun. The story: racist cops arrested a black old man on vacation, not knowing he's an FBI agent, reflects a reality still present in American society today. The issue of racial discrimination and police overreach, especially toward black communities. The incident with Malcolm Mac Harrison at Blue Horizon Resort in Hilton Head Island isn't just fiction. It echoes real events like George Floyd's in 2020, or countless cases of black individuals unfairly targeted in public spaces. The detail of Mac, a former FBI agent with 30 years of service, being handcuffed in front of his family due to Vincent Cole and Officer Kyle Brennan's baseless suspicion, shows that even those with accomplishments and status aren't immune to racial bias. Diane Foster's arrival, confirming Mac's identity, and Ben's viral livestream, grabbing public attention, mirror the power of social media and solidarity in exposing injustice, a common phenomenon in the U.S. today. From the Black Lives Matter movement to online campaigns like #Justice4. The lesson from this story isn't just personal resilience, but how communities can drive change. The Harrison family didn't accept resort manager Edward Hayes's empty apology or stay silent after the insult. Instead, they sued, held a press conference, and used their story to inspire a practical approach in America, where civil rights lawsuits and public outcry often spark reform. The advice for real life is, when facing injustice, use evidence like Ben's video, find allies like Diane, and don't hesitate to stand up, whether through legal action or public pressure. Leela's dream of becoming a lawyer and Mac's commitment show that every person, from kids to seniors, can help change the system. A powerful message for Americans today: justice doesn't come on its own. It demands courage and collective action. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the Harrison family's fight for justice and support stories of standing up for the truth. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video as we keep pushing for a fairer society.